Drone clips surfaced online showing Blake Shelton standing alone at sunset, feeding torn papers into a fire. That's it. No sound. No explanation. Just flames, ash, and a moment that felt too private to be public. Within hours, the internet did what it always does, paused the footage, zoomed in, argued over handwriting, and started telling stories. Some claimed the writing looked like Gwen Stefani's. Others swore it reminded them of Miranda Lambert. None of it was confirmed. But that didn't stop millions of people from feeling like they were watching something they weren't supposed to see, because this wasn't really about paper or fire. It was about timing. What led up to that moment, and what came after, hit a nerve. Three massive names in music, Blake Shelton, Gwen Stefani, and Kelly Clarkson, linked not by headlines, but by something quieter. Heartbreak that turned into songs. Silence that followed applause. And a kind of healing that doesn't announce itself. What happened over the next 24 hours reframes everything. People think they know about Blake Shelton. Why that fire meant more than any rumor ever could. What people actually saw in that footage was surprisingly simple. Blake Shelton walking toward a metal barrel near the edge of his property as the sun dropped low. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't performing. Just standing there, one page at a time, feeding paper into a quiet fire. The clip didn't show where the papers came from or what they said. It didn't explain why he chose that exact moment. All it gave the internet was silence, and silence always gets filled. Within hours, users started breaking the video down frame by frame. Screenshots circled on social media. People claimed they could see handwriting before the flames took it. Slanted letters. Familiar loops. Some insisted it matched Gwen Stefani's writing. Others argued it looked older, like something from his past with Miranda Lambert. None of those claims were verified, but that didn't slow anything down. Comment sections turned into debates, almost like evidence was being examined in a courtroom. But here's the part that got lost in all that noise. Even if the writing had been clear, even if a name had been visible, it wouldn't have explained the real question. Why burn them at all? People weren't reacting to ink on paper. They were reacting to the idea of someone choosing to let go in a way that couldn't be undone. And once that image took hold, the fire stopped being about whose words were on those pages and started being about what kind of weight a person has to be carrying to want them. Gone. What makes the footage feel heavier is what people imagine happened before it. Not the fire itself, but the quiet hours leading up to it. No stage lights. No audience. Just a morning that starts the same way it probably has for years. The kind where muscle memory does the work while your mind lags behind. Still half stuck somewhere it doesn't want to be. Fans pointed out the details they recognized right away. The chipped coffee mug sitting on the counter. The boots by the door. The jacket left on the same hook. Ordinary things, but loaded once you know the history. That mug, according to longtime followers, was a gift from years ago. Back when life felt louder and messier, and forever still seemed solid. Seeing him reach for it without thinking felt less like nostalgia and more like habit proof. That some pieces of the past don't disappear just because time moves on. That's what made this moment different from a performance. There was no expression to sell a feeling. No smile, no visible breakdown either. Just a face that already seemed to know how the day was going to feel before it even fully began. The house stayed quiet. Steam rose from the mug and faded into nothing. It looked like someone moving through a routine on autopilot while carrying thoughts too heavy to bring into full daylight. And that realization that this wasn't staged set the tone for everything that followed. That quiet weight didn't come from nowhere. Blake Shelton has been open about the fact that his personal life hasn't followed the clean fairy tale arc people like to imagine. 2 marriages, 2 public endings. First Keenet Williams, long before the spotlight was this intense. Then Miranda Lambert, a relationship that fans invested in deeply and watched unravel in real time. Divorces don't just end relationships. They leave behind questions that stick around long after the papers are signed. What people often miss is the kind of internal pressure that comes with failing at something you genuinely believed in. Especially when the world is watching. Especially when your job is to stand on stage and sing about love like you've got it all figured out. Time passes, new chapters begin, but those earlier versions of yourself don't just vanish. They sit quietly in the background, showing up in small moments you don't expect. That's why so many viewers connected the fire to more than one name. Not because of proof, but because of pattern. Heartbreak doesn't stay neatly tied to one person or one era. It overlaps. It stacks. And when you've lived multiple lives inside the same body, letting go of one chapter can feel like letting go of a piece of who you used to be. That idea that the fire might represent accumulated weight, not a single memory, is where this story starts to widen beyond. Blake alone. Gwen Stefani understands that kind of weight better than most people ever will. Long before she and Blake became the couple everyone knows now, she was coming out of a 13-year marriage that ended in a way she said completely shattered her sense of trust. Reports at the time described a discovery that changed how she looked at her entire life, not just her relationship. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic in public. It was private, confusing, and deeply destabilizing. What came next wasn't retreat, it was music. Gwen turned that collapse into songs that sounded upbeat on the surface, but carried something heavier underneath. Millions of people sang along without realizing they were listening to someone processing betrayal in real time. That's the strange power of pop music. Pain gets wrapped in melody, and suddenly the most personal moments become communal. That's why some fans immediately pulled Gwen into the fire narrative, even without proof. Not because she was there, but because her history made the symbolism feel familiar. She's talked about how starting over doesn't mean erasing the past. It means learning how to live with it without letting it control you. Seeing Blake alone on that ranch, in a moment that felt stripped of performance, reminded people of the kind of nights Gwen has described before. Quiet ones. Heavy ones. The kind that don't look dramatic but change you anyway. Kelly Clarkson's story fits into this pattern in a way people don't always connect right away. Her career has always been built on emotional honesty, but behind the scenes, her personal life was carrying its own long arc of unresolved pain. After her divorce from Brandon Blackstock became public, Kelly spoke openly about how overwhelming the noise was. Not just the headlines, but the internal reckoning that comes when a life you planned suddenly doesn't exist anymore. She's talked about needing space that belonged to no one but herself. No explanations. No performing strength for other people. Just sitting with discomfort long enough to understand what it was actually asking of her. Therapy, solitude, and slowing down became part of that process. Not as a dramatic reset, but as a way to stop running from feelings she'd learned to outpace for years. That's where the connection between all three artists becomes impossible to ignore. Different genres, different lives, same cycle. Love, loss, public expectations, and the pressure to keep smiling through it all. When people watched Blake standing alone with that fire, they weren't just watching him. They were recognizing a moment they'd heard about in Kelly's interviews and Gwen's lyrics. The part after the collapse. When there's no applause left, just you, your thoughts, and the decision of whether to face them or drown them out. This is where the fire stops being literal and starts being symbolic. There's no verified explanation for what those papers were or where they came from. No confirmation about handwriting. No statement from Blake, Gwen, or anyone close to them. Everything beyond the visual is interpretation. But symbolism doesn't need proof to land, it just needs resonance. Fire has always carried the same meaning across cultures. Ending, release, transformation. When people saw Blake feeding those pages into the flames one by one, They didn't see paperwork being destroyed. They saw someone choosing finality. Burning something means you can't go back and reread it. You can't reframe it later. Whatever it was becomes ash, permanently changed. That's why the arguments over whose words they were almost miss the point. Whether they came from Gwen, Miranda, or a chapter no one knows about, the act itself suggested accumulated weight. Years of memories, regrets, conversations replayed too many times. And that's what made the moment hit so hard. Not the possibility of drama, but the quiet recognition that sometimes healing doesn't look like moving forward confidently. Sometimes it looks like standing completely still and letting something irreversible happen so you can finally breathe again. At the end of it all, what made this footage resonate wasn't scandal, drama, or whose handwriting appeared on the papers. It was the quiet human truth behind it. The weight of memories. The way heartbreak leaves traces long after the world moves on. The way artists like Blake Shelton, Gwen Stefani, and Kelly Clarkson have all carried pieces of the past while learning to live with them. Closure doesn't always come in speeches, in songs, or in tidy endings. Sometimes it's sitting alone with your history, letting it exist beside you without flinching. Sometimes it's standing in fading sunlight, watching flames consume what you no longer need and letting silence fill the rest. That's the moment that matters, the one nobody can script, nobody can perform, nobody can edit for social media. The internet will keep speculating, debating, projecting, and arguing. But the real lesson is already there on that Oklahoma ranch. You don't have to destroy everything that built you to move forward. You just have to stop letting it trap you. And maybe, if you pay close enough attention, you'll see that sometimes the quietest, most ordinary acts, making coffee, feeding the cattle, letting a record play, carry the heaviest meaning of all.